Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Strategic Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Golding, flying solo today, talking to you about business podcast. We've covered this on this show before, but today's episode, we're going to focus specifically on the types of businesses that should be utilizing podcast and why.
Welcome to the Golding Group Strategic Growth Podcast, featuring expert insights, interviews with thought leaders, and business plan triage. Hosted by Kyle Golding, award-winning entrepreneur, CEO, and chief strategic idealist for the Golding Group.
How to communicate without selling, but build relationships instead. Podcast is the perfect platform for that. We're going to talk about why entrepreneurs, brands, which are startups, big businesses, small businesses, nonprofits, community and professional organizations, and even government agencies should be highly considering podcasting as a medium for, again, communicating without selling. We're not trying to be a commercial. We're not trying to be an infomercial. We're not trying to close a sale, but we are trying to do other things that are beneficial to your brand, to your audience development, and to your communication process. So let's get right into who should be using podcast and why. And let's start with an individual. Let's start with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs often make great podcasters. Some of the best podcasters out there are entrepreneurs themselves, but there are also a lot of entrepreneurs who think that they are not good candidates to be podcasters. They don't feel like what they do is interesting enough or can talk about it enough, or maybe their personality doesn't match up. But I'm here to tell you, as an entrepreneur who podcasts, who appreciates podcasts, I also interview a lot of entrepreneurs on this podcast and the Oklahoma Venture Forum podcast, which I also host and do a lot of interviews almost exclusively with entrepreneurs, business owners, etc., that entrepreneurs have some of the best stories to tell. And entrepreneurs can, on a podcast, communicate and educate and relate to a lot of people who want to be entrepreneurs, people who want to be in business, maybe people who even want to pitch them for an investment on the VC side, etc. All types of entrepreneurs are people and in a profession that other people look up to, would like to emulate, and would like to learn more about and figure out how they could maybe possibly quit the day job, be an entrepreneur, or just simply take some entrepreneurial mindset, some things you can learn from an entrepreneur and move it forward in their career and in their pursuit of success, even if they don't ever start a business. So you think about a lot of the well-known, famous, if you will, entrepreneurs that you could think of. All the folks on Shark Tank, Mark Cuban and Damon John and Mr. Wonderful and Lori Garnier and the rest of them are on Shark Tank. You think of Richard Branson, you think of Elon Musk, you think of all kinds of high-profile entrepreneurs. They are great podcast hosts and podcast guests. Now, all those people have giant, big personalities. They're really good at talking about what they do. They don't mind telling you how much money they have earned and lost in the world. They don't have any of those kind of hang-ups that a less famous, more normal entrepreneur like those of us right here, maybe on this podcast right now, would want to share with you. And they have personality types that make all types of media good for them as well. But I can tell you that if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a venture capitalist, if you're an investor, if you're someone who works sort of on the backside of business, you have a lot of knowledge, a lot of insight, a lot of perspective that can help a lot of people. And it might attract good people to your entrepreneurial pursuit. So maybe someone who wants to work for you, maybe someone who wants to invest with you or pitch you for an investment if you are a VC or a personal investor, an angel investor, etc. Or someone who wants to provide services or connect you with someone else who needs your services, etc. So there's lots of good reasons to share your story as an entrepreneur and to display and educate and tell people about your path from where you started, your first idea for your first business onward. Or if you're new in the entrepreneurial process, that's also a story that's worth hearing and new, young, and inspiring entrepreneurs will want to hear as well. So entrepreneurs should definitely be using podcasts. And again, I've referenced the fact that we interview a lot of entrepreneurs on this podcast. I interview a lot on the Oklahoma Venture Forum podcast. In the show notes, I'll put the links for all those as well. So there are great reasons to have conversations with and about entrepreneurs. Now, you might think to yourself as an entrepreneur that you are not the right person for a podcast. It's easy to think that a brand or a business or a marketing team should be producing your podcast. And if you're an entrepreneur, especially a solopreneur or someone who works very independently, you may be thinking, I'm not interesting enough, or I don't have the personality, or I can't speak well into a microphone or look at a camera in order to be a very good podcaster or video blogger, if you will. And the fact is, there's lots of ways you can work around it if it's true. You're probably selling yourself short. And if you're an entrepreneur, you should have at least enough confidence in yourself because you're doing things kind of outside the norm and on your own anyway. So you have confidence in yourself. But if you think you're not the person as an entrepreneur to carry a show, there are all types of formats for shows. Now, there's a solo format. My Saturday Morning Hustle podcast is typically solo. I almost never have guests on that show. It's all just me talking. That one is entrepreneurial, but also a little bit more general motivation, and a lot of advice I give on that podcast. The Saturday Morning Hustle has a lot to do with just how to pursue success, how to be successful in business, but in personal life and in your personal development, etc. And I do that very intentionally so that it's not just a business podcast. But as an entrepreneur or anyone who wants to host a podcast, you can do it solo. Just sit down in front of a mic and go. A lot of people do that, and a lot of people have a lot of success with that. But you can also have a co-host. Typically, on the Strategic Growth Podcast, Pritch Pritchard has been my co-host in the past for hundreds of episodes. Pritch is retired now, and good luck on that. Pritch has earned his retirement from the podcast world after many, many years of being very successful, both as a public information officer in the Navy and as a public relations and professor at OU and a couple of other universities. Written 5 books too. So Pritch is retired, but I've had a co-host on this show. You can also have a guest interview format where yourself and a guest or 2 or 3 have conversations, or maybe the focus is more on the guest and what they bring to the conversation as the host. You're just leading the conversation, which is a lot what I do on the Oklahoma Venture Forum podcast. Or you could put together a panel. A podcast or an interview scenario does not have to be 1 or 2 people. It can be 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe even you're not even in the same room. Maybe you use some virtual technology and some Zooming and some streaming to put multiple people together from all over the country or from different types of businesses or different industries, or maybe members of your team. So maybe someone from the marketing department, from the engineering department, from the sales department, from HR, all the types of people in your business. Maybe you put them together as part of the process. So it doesn't matter that you're not the most electric dynamic speaker if you think a podcast does benefit you as an entrepreneur or as a business or as a brand. So let's talk about brands. How do brands utilize podcasts? Well, it goes back to the theme of our conversation today. Communicate without selling. And now it sounds counterproductive to some people, but no one really likes to be sold anything. Now, we like to buy things, and we need to buy things. And we want information, and we want access and the ability to buy them, but we don't want to be actively sold. We don't want a salesperson kind of trying to stick something in our face or trying to get us into a sales situation that benefits them only and not us. That's what I mean by not being sold. So brands have an opportunity to communicate, to build community, to create trust, and display authenticity in that audience development relationship by using podcasts, by having deeper conversations about the brand, about the process behind it, all the things that come with a business that's not selling you the product or service. This is the key, not selling product or service. So the types of brands, the types of businesses that could be utilizing podcasts quickly, startups. And you may think to yourself, if I'm in the startup mode, maybe I have a lot on my plate, a lot to do that I don't necessarily have time for podcasts. But again, because people trust podcasts and people will listen to podcasts and listen passively too. Some quick note, passive audio or listening passively means people listen to podcasts when they're on the treadmill, when they're in the car, when they're traveling, when they are doing things on their desk or at work, and they listen in the background and they find little nuggets that they want to go back and maybe find out more about. as opposed to watching TV where a commercial interrupts the TV and the program that you're watching, or a YouTube video, etc. And that commercial, that advertisement, that sell process interrupts you. Passive consumption, podcast listening, is something that is more, some people will spend longer time with it. And again, if you're not selling, but you're just communicating interesting information, they will take it in and then have a potential for a relationship or a trust factor with your brand. So that's important for startups. When you're starting a business, you need to explain what it is you do. You need to explain your value, and you need to build a community around your product or service before you ever sell anything. So podcasts can be perfect for startups in order to do that. And if you're a startup today, especially maybe a high technology, high growth, high potential, etc., those types of tech startups and things that are very hot, very popular, very investable, building your community and accessing people in new ways in 2023 media instead of 2020 or 1980 or 1950, podcast fits that format. And then podcasts, of course, are things that you can take snippets, chop it up, use the video, use the audio, put it on social media, do your digital channels, all the things that typically are going with the startup process. So podcasts are great for startups. If you have a small business, podcasts are great ways, very cost-effective ways, low cost, definitely lower than producing TV spots or buying media placement, but it's a very cost-effective way, again, to develop an audience, to build relationships in order to bring people, bring attention, bring interest to your product or service as a small business. When you're small, you need to have great impact with minimal cost, or at least controllable cost. Podcasts are a great way to do that. And you get to, because you're not in selling mode, but because you're explaining the product or service, you're explaining the business model, you're talking about the people that are involved, you're giving a lot of information about your why in a podcast, because we're not selling anything. You get to create that differentiation from your small business and other small businesses in your industry or in your sector. That differentiation is the key to successful eventual selling and conversion. People need to understand what it is. They need to understand why it exists. They need to understand the value to them. They need to understand what is different about you. When you talk about what you do, your process, your motivation, the people involved, the differentiation comes through in a very cost-effective way. Good for small businesses. Now, big business. Often large businesses, and sometimes called corporate or corporations, get a bad rap. A lot of people think that corporate world and corporate overlords and these big companies making all this money are bad. And of course, they can be run bad, but they can be run well too. And they can employ a lot of people, and they can do a lot of great things. They can provide a great value and service. But a large business, an established business, a business that isn't necessarily trying to build sales, but is trying to continually educate and reach out and connect with audience and maybe expand into new audiences, new segments, new ways of doing business because they're already established. A podcast allows you an opportunity, because you're not selling, to provide personification, humanity, the people involved. The podcast for a large corporate brand doesn't have to be the CEO. Could be. Doesn't have to be the CMO or the marketing director. It could be the head of HR. It could be the head of production. It could be an interview series where you're talking to people from different departments. A panel, like we discussed earlier, of people from different departments. You could do different things that are focused on the product or service, how it gets produced, how it gets made, etc., that are not selling, but we get an insight into the people behind it, that other motivation outside of corporate money making. So that's an opportunity to change that narrative and add a new conversation to your already big mass marketing vehicles that you're using in order to find new and different ways to connect with your audience, to instill yourselves into their lives, to create trust factors, to allow them to understand your differentiation, and maybe for them to connect with the people involved as much as the product or service that your big corporate brand provides. So there's a behind the curtain appeal to using podcasts for big corporate entities. Now, another thing both small and large businesses need to consider is there are certain industries that are regulated from the government and other bodies as to what they can and cannot advertise, what they can and cannot do and say in their marketing, or some ethical issues and concerns too. When I was in college, one of the things I was told was that medical and legal professions were not really supposed to advertise, that it was essentially ambulance chasing when these types of professions, these types of professional services did mass marketing and advertising. And I still kind of hold a lot of that to be true. And I see this on television and other places. It kind of hits me as unethical. But a podcast, again, not selling anything, but just having conversations, educating people maybe about medical issues, about legal issues, about their rights as an individual or as a citizen, or their business rights, or HR or tax issues, or other things that, again, are educational, that are informative, that are helpful, but not in a selling mode or a selling format at all, but simply trying to convey information, to be helpful, to be seen more as part of the community and someone who is a benefit, as opposed to someone you only go to when you're in trouble, when you're sick, when you're hurt, when you have a problem, legal or otherwise. So regulated and industries and ethical considerations can definitely be addressed and worked with and supplement any other communication that you do on a business level by utilizing podcast. Having the business owners, the partners, the attorneys, the doctors, the CPAs, etc., actually tell people things they need to know in order to do their business better, in order to protect their rights, in order to engage as citizens, etc. And then when it reaches a new level where they need more direct, more specific guidance from those professions as they get deeper into a situation, hopefully because you've been sharing and helpful and community building, not selling on your podcast, your brand, your firm, your name can be associated with someone who maybe they feel trustworthy and a kinship to, a connection, a relationship to, that they can call, they can inquire, and it potentially becomes business for you or a referral for business for you. So regulated industries and ethical concerns are definitely addressed through podcasting. Nonprofits can do the exact same thing. Nonprofit organizations can utilize podcasts to, again, convey the people behind what's happening, the people that are actually doing the work out in the community, raising funds and providing services as a nonprofit entity, but also focus on your why the organization exists, why it was started, why it continues to do what it does, how it helps people, the impact shown. For every dollar received, we get to create this kind of impact in our community, tell success stories, both from the organizational side and maybe even the public side, people who receive the benefit, who get the products or services from the nonprofit organizations themselves. Maybe they want to tell their success story. And again, because we're not trying to sell anything, and in this case, sell a donation, selling someone the opportunity to write you a check. We want donations for nonprofit organizations. We want people to volunteer for them. And we need people to understand what those nonprofits do and utilize those services if they need them. If you are homeless, you need to understand what organizations can help you. If you are hungry, if you are having a legal issue you can't defend yourself from, if you have a mental health issue, if you have a substance abuse issue, anything where you might need the help, the guidance, the support, the services of a nonprofit organization. Maybe yourself, you listen to a podcast or hear about it. Maybe you ask some friends or counselors or other people who could point you in the right direction. And maybe those people have been influenced by hearing the why and the people and the impact of an organization through a podcast. So because podcasts are not selling, but conversational, relationship-based, informational, you can develop your community, you can develop your supporters, you can draw stakeholders to you, and those people can then refer others who need your products or services. So you can help more people through referrals and receive stakeholders who are invested in what it is you're trying to do. Eventually, they will volunteer, they'll donate, or they'll tell other people they should do as well. So podcasts are great vehicles for nonprofit organizations as well. Community and professional organizations also benefit from podcasts. I mentioned OVF earlier, the Oklahoma Venture Forum podcast. It's a professional organization for business development, economic development professionals in the state of Oklahoma. I host their podcast. I'm on the board of directors for OVF. I host their podcast. We have monthly meetings. This is a professional organization. Those podcasts allow us to go deeper into the people who present to us, who help us be better professionals as economic developers and as business people. And we have pitches. We have startup companies and people that are looking for funding and other support that pitch to the investors and business support professionals in the room. The podcast allows us to go deeper into all of those conversations. So we are helping our members. We're helping the pitch companies, the startups, the local small businesses, but we're also helping the general business community. Anyone can listen to the podcast and benefit from them. So there's benefit to it. And it gives someone an idea, a taste, a sample, a preview of what they could expect if they come to an Oklahoma Venture Forum meeting. So it's an opportunity for someone to maybe find interest, maybe consider joining a meeting or joining the organization as a member because of something they heard on the podcast, because we're not selling, because we're conveying information and giving better, deeper understanding of the subject matter, et cetera. And not just for our members, but for the community as a whole. So professional organizations can benefit their members, benefit potential members, attract potential members to them, and benefit their community as a whole by sharing information on a podcast. And then finally, government. That's right. Your government it could benefit, government agencies could benefit from utilizing podcasts. Now, the government as a whole, federal government, the state government, our county and city governments, et cetera, they communicate to us a lot as citizens, right? We see emails, we see television commercials, we hear radio spots, we get direct mail from them. They have press conferences. We read things in the newspaper and see things on news stations about what the government is doing, good, bad, and things we need to know about as citizens and as people within maybe a geographical area, etc. But government agencies, especially the smaller agencies that maybe people don't know what they do, the service they provide, or the services that citizens are able to take advantage of, a lot of that people don't understand. There's a lot of intimidation around government. There's a lot of sometimes mistrust and a lot of just not knowing what government does, what government agencies do. And as a citizen, am I capable of engaging them, or do I have to go through some official channel? And what benefit is it to me, and how can I help? And how can I make sure that they understand what the citizens need in order to do their job better? All of that interaction is often very limited and very kind of behind a veil of not necessarily secrecy, but a veil of uncertainty and unknowing from citizens. So a podcast speaking directly about what any government agency does, the why that they do it, the people involved, again, all of those things that benefit every other example here in our podcast conversation could also benefit a government agency and probably go even deeper because there is some sort of misunderstanding and mistrust about a lot of what government does. And so this is a grand opportunity as using a podcast. And again, you're not selling anything, but you're promoting the services you provide for citizens as taxpayers, as citizens, as people within the area, the place they can receive these things. That it's done for a reason. Explain that reason, tell people what they can do, break down that barrier of communication between the citizens and the government that is there to support them. These are just some of the ways you could be utilizing podcasts for whatever it is you do. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a solopreneur, if you're a venture capitalist, if you run a small business, a big business, if you run a community or professional organization, if you run a nonprofit, if you are a government agency, these are great examples. And also remember, don't forget those regulated industries and those industries that have high ethical concerns. All of those things can benefit from utilizing podcasts. So if you want to know more, if you'd like a deeper conversation and something more specific that fits your scenario, please make sure you contact me and the rest of us at The Golden Group. You can find that contact information on our website, thegoldengroup.com. Also, read the follow-up post about different types of industries, different types of businesses, who should be podcasting, who should be utilizing this format. There is a full post on our website about that is going to correspond with this podcast being posted on the first Wednesday, August 2023. So check out that post. Check out the show notes here for links of anyone that I referenced in this podcast. And if you have questions, if you have ideas, if you'd like to know more about how you could be utilizing podcasts, no matter which of those categories you fit into, contact me through the website, through our social media post, and let me know how I can help you develop your own podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Golden Group Strategic Growth Podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode. Follow the Golden Group on social media. For more information, past episodes, or to contact us, please visit thegoldengroup.com.